Revolutionary greetings, comrades. We are discussing Zimbabwe elections, what next, and any other general issue. Please keep your questions coming. We might get time to respond to your questions. So keep them coming. Just write your questions in the comment section. So let's get straight to the questions that were posted earlier on. Though we did try to respond to those questions, but I know that we're not thorough in our response. Welcome all those that have joined us. So the first question from Comrade NLC Nompilo Moyo says, "Good morning, Comrade. What is ZANU-PF next step after the SADC final report? Do you think they will challenge it or they will go on as if nothing happened?" The SADC observer team, as we now all know, said the elections in Zimbabwe were not free and fair. In terms of what we understand to be the process, is that the report gets handed over to the chairperson of the organ on peace and security, in this case, the Zambian president, which this has been done, as we understand. This report then gets processed through the structures of SADC. The final structure, which is the heads of state summit, that needs to process the report. Normally, a report will have recommendations, not instructions or not directives, but the recommendations. What SADC needs to look into is to ensure that there is peace in Zimbabwe. But we must also remember that Zimbabwe is a sovereign state. SADC cannot order Zimbabwe, as I've seen in a number of platforms, cannot order Zimbabwe to hold new elections. The best, in my view, that SADC can do is to ask Zimbabweans themselves, through the political parties that contested elections or parties that are represented in the Parliament of Zimbabwe, to have a dialogue amongst themselves. This dialogue to be facilitated by SADC. We have been here before. You remember that in 2017 at the summit, SADC Heads of State Summit in Tanzania, a facilitation team was put in place, which was headed by former President Thabo Mbeki, was the facilitator, and the parties that were represented in Parliament participated in the discussion. So they might want to go that route, but it all depends on the willingness of the parties that are represented in Parliament to say, do they want dialogue or not? But I do not think that SADC will direct a member, one of its members, in this case Zimbabwe, and direct it to run fresh elections, as some want to suggest. I do not think that that is going to happen. We should look at how SADC dealt with the question of Lesotho. The facilitation happened in Lesotho. Lesotho was not directed by SADC, but SADC encouraged the people of Lesotho and assisted them to have dialogue amongst themselves. SADC handled it differently, the Eswatini question. You remember there was violence, opposition members being brutalized in Eswatini. The SADC team went to Eswatini, but it did not consult everyone. So the issue of Eswatini was handled differently. So it is not given, as some want to suggest, that SADC is going to direct Zimbabwe to hold the fresh elections. Remember, in 2008, former president, the late Robert Mugabe, had to run on his own in the runoff in June 2008. And he was leading. After that, he was a part of the people that were negotiating. He was president. The only issue that arose through the negotiations, which led to the Parliament of Zimbabwe amending the constitution, was to create the position of prime minister. And the SADC did not order a rerun of an election. So I do not think that they will do the same. And Comrade Ncube Lawrence, right? Do you know the mandate of SADC, or you're assuming, Mr. Mapena? The mandate of SADC is to observe elections. right? That has been the mandate of SADC to observe the elections and arrive at a conclusion whether the elections were held under the SADC guidelines on holding democratic elections. That has been the mandate. And then the observer team reports to SADC to say, yes, the elections were held under, in line with the SADC guidelines, or, as in this case, the elections were not held under the SADC guidelines. Therefore, the question arises to say, if the elections were not held under the SADC guidelines, what should SADC do? And I want to argue, as I'm arguing, that SADC does not have power to direct Zimbabwe to say, we are now going to hold, Zimbabwe will conduct elections which are going to be supervised by SADC, or SADC will take over in terms of running the affairs of Zimbabwe, as was the case when we're emerging from the war in 1980, where Lord Soames became the governor. SADC will not appoint a governor to the same level to Lord Soames, as was the case in 1980. It is not going to happen. And then Comrade Tabani Ngwenya writes, morning, what do you think is going to happen to ZEP holders next year? In terms of the Pretoria High Court judgment, is that permits ZEP are extended to the 28th of June 2024, right? But we have said that the minister is appealing that judgment, which then suspends the implementation of the judgment of the Pretoria High Court. Which, and again, this is why the Helen Suzman Foundation has gone to court, realizing that if the appeal by the minister suspends the implementation of the judgment, therefore the permits will expire on the 31st of December 2023, which then will put at risk holders of ZEP from the 1st of January 2024. So we are looking, we are following closely, following closely the court case, which again the minister says is going to vigorously challenge what the Helen Suzman Foundation wants to do. Because Helen Suzman Foundation says there's going to be mass deportations from the 1st of January 2024. So in short, Comrade Tabani Ngwenya, we await all these processes, and we hope that there's going to be a directive. Either the court will make a decision, or the Department of Home Affairs will make a decision on what happens pending these applications before the courts. And Comrade Jet always says, Mr. Mapena, why are you behaving like Mtswanga? Usually people who preach like you would have been received something from ZANU. Mumba condemned Zek. Why did ZANU feel threatened by this? Comrade Jed Alois, I'm not a member of ZANU PF. I'm not even their supporter. I'm not a member of Triple C. I'm not even their supporter. I'm a member of the Zimbabwe Communist Party. So what I speak is what we think is going to happen, because I should not mislead you. I should not mislead you and say that Zimbabwe is going to be placed under, as you like, under administration. It is not going to happen. If you think I might be wrong, well, let's get back to this discussion 6 months down the line. Because what complicates issues, Comrade Jed Alois, is that the election, the entire election, was condemned by SADC. That's the starting point. The entire election was condemned by SADC. But in places where the opposition won, they've gone to be sworn in either as councillors or members of parliament, right? That it complicates the whole thing, right? So it is clear that the councillors from Triple C and members of parliament from Triple C, senators, will not want a rerun of the election, right? That one is very clear. If indeed Triple C wanted a rerun, the entire election, a rerun of the entire election, Their councillors, members of parliament, were not meant to take up those to or allow themselves to be sworn in into office. Already, if you follow them on social media, they are putting plans in place on how they are going to manage or run their constituencies. So they are producing a 5-year plan, meaning that they will not want an election now until 2028. So they appear to be saying now it is the presidential election that was not run in line with the SADC guidelines on free and fair elections. But SADC says the entire election. So if Triple C would not have allowed their members to be sworn in as councillors and members of parliament, it was going to create a crisis. And the SADC was going to convene an urgent heads of state summit to say, well, this is the report that we have received from the observer team. The SADC organ on peace and security this is their recommendation. Meanwhile, the opposition in Zimbabwe has refused to take up or to be sworn in. We now have a constitutional crisis in Zimbabwe, right? Then SADC heads of state will immediately convene a summit because that will be a security threat on what the opposition will have done. And the SADC will then engage with the opposition, engage with the ruling party to say, how do you break this impasse, which is as a result of an election which was not held under the guidelines of SADC. But because that the opposition has gone, as councillors, they've gone into parliament, very soon they'll be parading their brand new vehicles. It makes it very difficult on how to move forward. MP Rem says, good afternoon, Mr. Mabena. You are right. SADC cannot do anything in Zimbabwe. It can not order anything. Of course, you are correct. What it can do, SADC, is to facilitate talks between ZANU-PF and Triple C. That's what SADC at the very best can do. And at the very best, you can then have a government of national unity, which we had from 2009 to 2013, to say the government of national unity must work on ensuring that the laws that SADC pointed out in the constitution, those amendments are effected. Laws are changed in parliament so that the next election, or you remove all these impediments that hinder us from having democratic elections under the SADC guidelines. Comrade Robson Muganza said, not SADC, not SADC only, but all the observers. I'm not sure about the Commonwealth report. If you read that report, I can't remember what it said, but you need to read the Commonwealth Observer report. There's another report. There were a number of observers, but I'll check the other reports on what they said. Comrade M. Rem says, all Zimbabweans can do anything about their situation. If there's uh, anything situation, unfortunately, SADC cannot vote for Zimbabweans who prefer staying in South Africa and calling it diaspora. Comrade MP Rem, sit down. Then we continue, Comrade MP Rem saying, the decision on ZEP holders will come from electorates. Maybe ZEP holders should start campaigning to South African citizens or voters. Well, I don't know. Big Drew says, we beg to differ. Comrade SADC will sit and the movement will come. The election is null and void. Comrade Big Drew, which election is null and void? Is it the council election or is it the constituencies and the wards where Triple C lost? Is it the one that is null and void? What about where Triple C won? Should we also have a rerun of the entire election? Because like I'm saying, if you take up your position, the election, which you all agree, was not free and fair. There's no dispute about that. But when you are saying a rerun, which election, which part of the election should we have a rerun? Should we have the entire? I was listening to Comrade Promising Corners, the spokesperson of Triple C, saying their members are taking the oath to defend or to safeguard what he calls liberated zones. They are wards and constituencies which they want. So if you say, and there must be a rerun of the election, are you saying the entire election or the presidential election or in constituencies and the wards where ZANU-PF won and exclude the constituencies and the wards where Triple C won? That's the clarity that is needed, right? Comrade Bernard says, I listened to N today in Buhera. It does not seem there is any chance for inclusive government. Let's see, but the language not conciliatory for me. Well, but I think if we are to have electoral reforms, ZANU-PF will never reform itself out of power, right? This parliament, the new parliament, which has been elected, 73 plus Triple C members and the rest is ZANU-PF. This parliament is not going to be different from the previous one, right? They are not going to agree on anything in terms of passing through the necessary electoral reforms, including the diaspora vote that all of us need in the diaspora. It is not going to happen. It can only happen if there's a if SADC facilitates dialogue between these two parties. If there's a facilitation by SADC, the two parties begin to engage. They will then engage on the legislative agenda to say, let's identify in terms of the Zimbabwean constitution, in terms of the laws that have been passed in parliament that hinder us as Zimbabwe to have a free and a fair election, and agree to remove those. This can only be achieved if there's a unity government. Outside that, they will be singing, mocking each other for the next 5 years, and in 2028, it will be the same story. That's the reality, which is going to. This is what exactly is going to happen, but only if there's an inclusive government. If Parliament of Zimbabwe can amend the constitution, for example, and they come up with a clause that Nelson Chamisa should become the Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, and they have some of his members into cabinet, and they push for one of his members to be the Minister of Legal Affairs, right? Who's responsible for the Constitution of Zimbabwe. It is then that you can begin to have reforms. And they push to have one of his members taking over as the Minister of Home Affairs. This will assist in ensuring that the police do not deny opposition from holding rallies. Then they should agree as the inclusive government, if the inclusive government is put in place, to then disband ZEC as it is currently constituted or composed, and appoint new ZEC commissioners. This can only be agreed if you have an inclusive government. But if you do not have an inclusive government, and you have all these wars that are going on, it will not happen. I hope I am wrong. And I want to see, I know there are students of political science that follow this platform. And it will be interesting to hear their views on how this can be achieved. Because every constitution, post-war, in a post-war situation, you study with our own how we ended the liberation war in Zimbabwe in 1979, 1980. We required Lancaster House talks for us to agree and adopt a constitution which we call the ceasefire constitution, which we replaced in 2013. We needed to have dialogue with Ian Smith. When the war was ongoing inside Zimbabwe, the political leadership was in Lancaster House negotiating. In South Africa, there was CODESA 1 and CODESA 2, right? So if you cannot negotiate, I do not see how you are going to resolve this outside violence, because if you do not negotiate, you are basically saying you are taking up arms of war and take over government through an AK-47. But we all know, I might be wrong, that the conditions we are in currently will not allow any person to set up their military wing and fight the Zimbabwean military with the SADC holding its hands without intervening on behalf of Zimbabwe. Is not going to happen where we are. We had our military coup in 2017. Did they assist us? No. Are we likely to have another coup in Zimbabwe? I do not know. Right. So if we are to resolve our problems democratically, as it were, or peacefully, the only solution out of this, in my view, or in our view, is a government of national unity. Once you have a government of national unity, it can then begin to work on these reforms. Let's read the last question. There are many questions. We'll try to answer some questions tomorrow, which I did not respond to. Have already gone up to 22 minutes. Alan Dere says, guys, let's keep doing what we're doing best before about working, provides food to our families, because ZANU-PF they will do nothing, as we know. What we know we have to do, Comrade Allen there, right, is to unite as the people of Zimbabwe and then not keep doing the same things, expecting different results. We did this in 2018. The result was the same. In previous elections, we did the same. We made a fundamental mistake when we were in the inclusive government from 2009 to 2013. The only thing that we achieved is the constitution, but we did not ensure its implementation to an extent that elections are held in a peaceful environment. What we achieved in 2013, because in 2013 I was working in Zimbabwe, from 2011 to 2013 I was working in Zimbabwe, a structure called Joint Monitoring Implementation Committee, JOMIC, which was implementing the global political agreement, which was signed on the 15th of September 2008. I was deployed in Matabele in South. One of the things that we achieved was to ensure that there was peace in the build-up to an election. Everyone will agree that violence was very, very low in 2013, right? Because it would go with the as three political parties, MDC, MDCT, ZANU-PF, in communities, and hold public meetings with the communities, asking communities not to be involved in political violence. We achieved that. What we did not achieve was the distribution of food. We wanted food distribution and other freebies to be taken out of ZANU-PF, but to be distributed by the state on non-partisan basis. There we failed. But in terms of violence, we did achieve that because we're working together as the parties that were represented in parliament. So that's the experience we're talking about. Outside that, like I'm saying, there are political scientists here, they might assist us, but I have my doubts. And Comrade Kate, what will be the incentive for ZANU-PF to be part of this government of national unity? ZANU-PF is currently isolated. You need the liberation movement. Remember, there's what you call liberation movement platform, former liberation movements platform. We have been listening to Comrade Fikile Mbalula saying a lot of things, which we do not have time now to engage on those. So first and foremost, the former liberation movements must convene their own summit and be honest with the ZANU-PF, because South Africa, as we talk about permits, South Africa is receiving thousands and thousands and thousands of Zimbabweans. And the ANC, as it goes to elections next year, is going to be faced with this challenge of undocumented migrants, many of whom are from Zimbabwe, right? So the ANC, SWAPO, FRELIMO, and the other liberation movements must first and foremost must be honest with the ZANU-PF, right? But I know that when they appear as bullying ZANU-PF, ZANU-PF will not listen to them. But behind closed doors, they need to be very frank with the ZANU-PF. Tomorrow, we're going to discuss what Comrade Fikile Mbalula is doing, because Comrade Fikile Mbalula in public, he speaks in the manner in which he's speaking. He receives lots of insults, right? What we do not know is what he says in private. Because if Comrade Fikile Mbalula were to condemn ZANU-PF in public, they will not meet him, right? They will not. And if they do not meet him, then you have a crisis. You can then not get ZANU-PF to a negotiating table. But we will continue with this discussion tomorrow. Is already 27 minutes. Comrade Colin Gumeda says, so Mr. Mapena, as we talk now, who is the president of Zimbabwe? The president of Zimbabwe is Emmerson Mnangagwa. This morning, he appointed two vice presidents, Kembo and Chiwenga. Comrade Kakeho Mokoena says, you didn't vote, you were in the comfort of South Africa. What are you on about? You didn't even canvass for your own party. Well, that's your own view, Comrade Kakeho Mokoena. Otherwise, comrades, let's continue this discussion. Tomorrow we'll try to find time to continue with this discussion. Otherwise, please like this video, subscribe to this YouTube channel, circulate. Goodbye.